Ruchim Aboyim B'Shem Hashem. B'Shem Yegin Shir. I'd like to welcome everyone to today's shir from Rabbi Yakov Zev Smith on what can maaser money be used for. Times we exclusive sponsoring a shir call Yegin Shir 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com.
This sugya, as we know, is something that's commonly asked about using maaser ksafim. People, Yisroel, HaKadoshim, Noisim, B'nai Noisim, and they give huge amounts of money for tzedakah. And the question is, what can maaser money be used for? For example, can you use it for tuition, to supporting children, to buy a Chinese auction, a lottery, and a host of other questions, buying an aliyah and building funds, and from different parts of our lives we have these type of shilas. What is the legitimate use of maaser ksafim? So the best approach really is to first determine what is the nature, or perhaps what is the objective of maaser ksafim. But let me explain. Yidden, as we said, to our total credit, are tremendous givers. And we have different types of tzedakahs that we have really from the Torah. We have maaser ani, that a person has to give a portion of his money to help aniyim. Maybe we'll say that maaser ksafim is a form of maaser ani. In other words, a person works and he has to think about achicha evyai. Now, if that would be the true understanding of maaser ksafim, then you can't use maaser ksafim for other mitzvos. You can't use it for tuition or to help a person learn, because you can't steal from an ani and do a mitzvah with it. So if it's maaser ani, then it has to be earmarked only for aniyim, not for mitzvahs. You want to do mitzvahs, use your own money. Or maybe, and this is more probable, that since there's a lav and an assay about tzedakah, that's a different mitzvah. Maybe maaser ksafim is more similar to maaser sheni. What is maaser sheni? The pasuk says in Parashas Re'eh, Asa ta'asa es kol tu azaracha, and Rashi says that's maaser sheni. Who do you give the maaser sheni to? Kohen, Levi? None of the above. Ani? No. What do you do with maaser sheni? The next pasuk says you bring it up to Shalayim and you eat it there. The gancha, siroishcha, yitzarecha, bekaris bekarcha, tzaynecha, oichmir atzedakah. You bring up animals or tfuah and you eat it yourself. What kind of tzedakah is that? So the next pasuk, the end of that pasuk explains. You know what the purpose of maaser ksafim is? Of maaser sheni is? Leman tilmad leyiras Hashem olekecha kol hayamim. Maaser sheni, a person has to improve himself. Maaser ani, he gives to an ani. Maaser sheni is to help the person. And it's noteworthy because Taisus and Bava Basra, Chaf Aleph, that beautiful Taisus, teaching the pasuk ki mitzia and teitzei soira. And the question is, how does Yishalayim tzia and produce Torah? So Taisus says, because when a person came to Yishalayim, he saw kedusha kedola, kahanim oiskim b'avoda, hayimachaben liva yoisel yerushamayim v'lol my Torah. When a person sees what life is all about, when he comes face to face with the truest Yiddishkeit, the avoda and bais hamikdash, it had a transformative effect. It changed him. So Taisus is saying that Yishalayim, bais hamikdash, was a generator of chizuk. And Taisus adds then, just like maaser sheni, the pasuk says tilmad leyira. What does that mean? So Taisus explains, when you came to Yishalayim to eat the maaser sheni, you spent time in Yishalayim, and it had a very big impact on your life. And that's music to how he is. Maaser sheni, a person has to take a portion of his income and use it for himself to add ruchnius into his life. It's sort of like a spiritual recharge of his battery, or maybe a spiritual tax. A percentage of your money has to go to improve yourself. You look in the chinuch and mitzvah shin samach, the mitzvah maaser behem, which is the same idea, and he says that's the purpose of maaser. Because every family, someone has to go up to Yishalayim to eat the maaser. So in every family there's going to be a paisik, there's going to be a yisacha, a shevet levi. There's going to be a person that's very chashav. And he says, when in every family there's a chashav person, we're going to be zoycha to see Mol Aretz Deis Hashem Kamayim Hayam B'chasim. It's like the Bershtam wanted every family should have their own Talmud Chacham. But one thing is clear, Maaser ani is to help an ani. Maaser sheni is to help the person to steig in ruchnius. So maybe we were going to say that maybe that's what maaser ksafim is. Today we don't have maaser sheni. If a person takes 10, or some people give 20% of their earnings and they use it for mitzvos, that will certainly have a tremendous impact. So maybe maaser ksafim is like maaser sheni. But the emphasis is even more to this suggestion. The Chofetz Chaim and Avas Chesed, the end, Chelik Beis, the end of Perek Chaf, makes a very startling statement. And he says, when someone gives maaser ksafim, it's gadol harbe yoisa, it's much greater than giving tzedakah. Now that's a shocking statement. Tzedakah, there's a lav, there's an asay. Maaser ksafim, some say it's only the rabbanon, some say it's only a minig. How could the Chofetz Chaim make this statement that it's bigger than tzedakah? And the Chofetz Chaim says an incredible insight into maaser ksafim that I think is a mitzvah lefarsim. And I must say, the same Yisoid I saw also quoted from the Kedushas Levi, Tver Shloima, and the Tanya. Zok to Chofetz Chaim that really, when a person is working and he's faithful to maaser, you know what he's doing? He's entering a partnership with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Baruch Shalom is his not so silent partner. Rebbeinu Shalom, to quote the words of Yaakov, I'm going to give it back to you. And you know what I think that means? That means when all the avodas perach of parnasa, the zeyas apecha toich alechem, all the avoid and parnasa becomes avodas hakodesh, and every penny he makes becomes shekel hakodesh, because every $100 that he's making, he is committed to give 10 or 20% to Borei Olam. So the money becomes shekel hakodesh, the work becomes avodas hakodesh. It's a beautiful appreciation to what maaser sheni is, maaser ksafim is. So that's why the Chofetz Chaim suggests that maaser ksafim has a greater effect or greater impact than tzedakah. Now, if we learn that maaser ksafim is like maaser sheni, then we could definitely say you could use maaser sheni, maaser ksafim for any mitzvah. It's lav dafka ani. So our shayla, our chakir, what is maaser ksafim, maaser ani, or maaser sheni? The nafkamin is all of our shaylas for today. So when halacha you can't guess, you have to find makairis. Let's look into the Torah. Where does it say maaser ksafim? And we'll work from there. We could glean an understanding what maaser ksafim is. So the emphasis, we could almost say vuma gate and vuma state. We see maaser ksafim. The pasuk in Parashat Lech Lecha, that Avram gave Malki Tzedek Melech Shalom, he gave him maaser, Mikol. Now, who was Malki Tzedek? That was Shem ben Noach. What was his occupation? He was a Rosh Yeshiva. Right? Yeshiva Shem ve'eva. So he gave his maaser to support Torah. It was not maaser ani. Pirkei Rabbi Eliezer and Perek Chav Zayin says from Avram was the first to give maaser. So Oibazoi, we see the first source, and it's taka like maaser sheni, but it's not maaser ani. Yitzchak, Shenemo gave to maaser. The pasuk in Parashas told us, "Vayizra Yitzchak ba'aretz hahi v'yimtza hahi me'yashar v'yacheu Hashem." He planted and he had a bumper crop, very successful. Frag the medrash in the beginning of Perek Lamed Gimel, Yitzchak Yizra chas v'shalom. The medrash asks, the pasuk is telling us that Yitzchak planted. Like, what do we care? How is that important? How is that on the Nevuah of the Dairis that Yitzchak planted? Chas v'shalom, that it was just the mundane planting. Zok the medrash that the pasuk means that Yitzchak planted tzedakah. He invested in tzedakah, the greatest tzedakah that has guaranteed dividends. And he quotes the pasuk, Ziru lechem tzedakah. And understandably, the Bersh Lebleiten is Shuldik, Aser b'shvil shetis asher, and he had 100 times more. So Avram gave maaser, and Yitzchak gave maaser. Yaakov is obvious in Parashat Vayetze v'chol shatitani asa asrenu loch. Zokta dasekenim, Yaakov tikein loseis maaser min hamamen. Yaakov was mechayiv us to give maaser. In fact, the dasekenim says that he literally gave maaser mikol on the breakfast that he ate. That's the mashal. And the second mashal, on his children, he gave maaser. What did he give maaser? Shevet Levi. Kodesh Hashem. So we see all the others gave maaser. The more famous makar for maaser is Tosis and Tainis Daf Tes, teaching the pasuk aser to aser. Zok the Gemara in Tainis Daf Tes b'shvil shetis asher. Zok Tosis quoting a Sefri that from here we see you have to give maaser from kol the rabbis ribis upakamatcha v'chol davar shemaviyach ban. Whatever you earn, you have to give maaser. Now, of course, ribis means beheta, either from a goy or with a heta iska. But Tosis is learning asa to asa is going on maaser ksafim. The pasuk in Malachi, the well-known pasuk that warms our hearts, that when a person gives maaser v'chanuna v'zois, harikoisel and bracha ad b'lidai, the pasuk says, that's also a source, midivri Kabbalah, to give maaser. And the sixth source is the pasuk in Mishlei, Kabbalah Hashem Mahoincha, Umereish called Fuascha, and the Takali, the Bir Hagra, and our Simon Reish Mem Tes points to this pasuk that's the makar of maaser. So we have 6 psukim, 6 makaris: Avram, Yitzchak, v'Yakov, Aser to Aser, Harikoisel and Bracha, and Kabbalah Shem Mahoincha. It's almost clear from all the psukim that there's no insistence on dafka giving to an ani. It's giving for mitzvos, and especially the way the Tanchuma in Parshas Re'ei Ois Yud Ches on the pasuk Aser to Aser, Zoktu Tanchuma Remez L'Mefor Sheyamim Lahafresh Echad Min Asora La'Molei Torah. And that's clear, it's lav dafka a tzedakah oriented mitzvah. It's a person that takes 10% or 20% of his earnings and he becomes a partner with Borei Olam and his money becomes shekel HaKodesh. And if you have any doubt, let me tell you a tshuva, one of the most yesoditic tshuva for today's sugya, a tshuva of Maram Metz. Now, a little history I think is in place. The Maram Metz was from the earliest Achrayim, the Marshal, the Shlah, Shach, Drisha, Taz, all quote him. So you're putting him, come out from the earliest Achrayim. His sefer was Me'il Tzedek. Now, some Svarim say he wrote Me'il Tzedakah, which is incorrect. That's a later gadol. Maram Metz was from the Kadmoin, wrote a sefer Me'il Tzedek, and therefore he's referred to as Maram Metz, Maram Mil Tzedek. The Drisha and the Shlah, the Drisha is on Reish Mem Tes, the Shlah is the end of Masechta Megillah, quotes the entire Lashon. We don't have that sefer, but I think it's kedai to read it. Sha'alta, you asked me, Liknei Svarim Mimam and Maaser, can a person buy Svarim with Maaser Kesef? Rogal Ahiris Lebnei Adam, what I always tell people is, Kol mitzvah shetava liyadi, any mitzvah, Kegoin liyais bal bris, to be the sandik, Oy lahachnis chasen v'kala l'chuppah, the person wants to get involved in reading shidduchim, making shidduchim, v'chein liknei svarim, lil meibehem ulashim lacherim, he'll give it to other people to use, of course you can't keep it for yourself. And here's the point, Im lahaya yechaylis biyadai, if he wouldn't do it otherwise, lahaya oisa mitzvah, if he wouldn't do the mitzvah, if he can't use maaser ksafim, yachal liknes men ha-maaser, you're allowed to use maaser. So it's clear that Maram Metz is saying maaser can be used for a mitzvah. Now the precondition, of course, is if he wouldn't do it otherwise. If you're going to do it using your own money, so adarabah, use your own money. Because don't forget, maaser ksafim is there to increase mitzvahs, not to pay for them. If you're going to do the mitzvah anyhow, so do it. But let's say the question is this, if I won't use maaser, I won't do it. By all means, do it. Because that's what maaser is, l'man tilma d'yira, to improve your ruchnius. Now, of course, there's another precondition that really the Maril, who lived before the Maram Metz, says, in Nun Vav Zayin, and he was asked about giving matanas levyoinim with maaser ksafim. So Maril makes a yisoid that any davar shebechayva that you're mechuyev to give, you can't use maaser. You can't use maaser to buy tzitzis or tefillin or matzah. And again, the svar, like I told you, maaser ksafim is to increase mitzvahs, not to finance them. So how are you using the tzedakah money for your mitzvahs? So basically we see that maaser ksafim is taka for mitzvahs. But it has to be something that's not a davar shebechayva, and something you wouldn't do otherwise. Now let me give you one more beautiful example. Imagine you come home today, someone calls you up, oh, I heard you learned about maaser ksafim. I'm going to ask you a shayla. You know, for years I've been supporting my nephew and my next door neighbor. They're sitting and learning. I feel great about it. It's a chashva investment. And it occurred to me, why should I give someone else to learn? Chayecha koidman. I want to have this idea. Tell me if you think it's a good idea. The year Tavshin Pei Gimel, I'm going to work, take all my maaser, put it in an account. It's not my money. I'm going to be maaser for maaser. And Tavshin Pei Dalid, I'm going back to kollel. I'm taking a sabbatical. I could give money to support my nephew and me, Epischlecht. Can I use my maaser that I could learn for a whole year? So what would you say? Adrabah, Laman Tilma Liyira. Right? That's what it's all about. Chayecha koidman. You know who else says that? The Netziv in Meishav, Dava Chelik Beis Ayin Hey. Someone asked him this shayla, and you know what his response is? And I quote, Yachaylu brachas al roishe. Like say in Yiddish, a bracha of dein cup. That's really what Maisa is all about. Now, he's not an ani, so you can't take a Maisa ani, but that's what Maisa Ksafim is. So we're very comfortable to say, Ibayis Ein Mikra, Ibayis Ein Misvara. Maisa Ksafim is to increase and improve ruchnius. It's not necessarily a Maisa Ani. But before we apply this to Maisa, we have sort of a roadblock that we have to deal with. Because the Maril in Minhagim, Hilchos Shoshana, Amud Reish Ayin Gimel, says, and I quote, he's talking about Hilchos Erev Rosh Hashanah, you should give tzedakah, remember, before Rosh Hashanah comes. But he warns us, don't forget, in those days, they didn't have electricity. It was an expense to light the bais medrash for Yom Tiv, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. So he said, if you take maaser to donate money to light up the bais HaKnesses, shaloi kedin oisin, ki ha-maaser shaykh la'aniyim. It's a very big schus to pay for lighting, but it's tzedakah money, it's ani money, it's not for mitzvos. So the Maril seems to hold that maaser is like maaser ani. And it's not the only reason that says this. Ram Rutenberg in Prague, Siman Ayin Dalid, says it even sharper. Moyis Maisa, Yira. Now listen to his lashon. Achashech ziku l'sitam la'aniyim. After you pledged to give it to the aniyim, ein l'shnoisam l'mitzvah cheres. You can't give it for a different mitzvah. The nira kegoizel aniyim. And then he says it again. Because Moyis Maisa ksafim, just like you wouldn't dare stick your hand into an ani's pocket and take out $100 if he has it and give it for a mitzvah, you can't use maaser because it's mammon aniyim and it's goyz laniyim. Now we have double trouble. First of all, we proved conclusively that maaser is for mitzvahs. And also, we just said the Marametz says clearly you can use it for any mitzvah. But you know what makes it even more troubling? The Ramah in Yeridei Reish Mem Tes Aleph, to my knowledge, the only halacha in Shulchan Aruch about Maaser Ksafim. The Ramah says, and I quote, Ein lasais mi Maaser shaloi dvar mitzvah, koineres beis haknesses oishar dvar mitzvah, rak yitnu laniyim. The Ramah is obviously quoting our Maril. So now we have a third problem. First of all, what's Pshat and Maril? Is he arguing Marametz? And the Ramah seems to paskin like the Maril. That means you can't use mais of any mitzvah. But the pliya in this is that the Shach and Taz on this Ramah quote the Marametz as if it's not a machlokes. It seems to be different. So how do we understand this? So you look in the Ber HaGoyla, that was the Vilna Gaon Zayda, it's on the page. So typically he just gives Mar Makaimis, but here he throws in a few words. And he says, Pirish, the Ramah that says you can't use Maisa for Neiros, that's when you're mechuyev to pay for the Neiros. For whatever reason, let's say you pledged, or whatever the case is, that's your obligation. Then it's a Davar Shebechayva. Davar Shebechayva, you can't use Maisa. So therefore, Zakta Ber HaGoyla, it's not a machlokes, Ramah and Marametz. Because the Ramah is talking about Davar Shebechayva. Davar Shebechayva, all agree you can't use Maisa. But if it's not a Davar Shebechayva, you want to do a mitzvah, all agree that the Marametz. And that's the way the Chassam Sof and Yeridei Siman Reish Lamed Aleph and the Chuvas explains the Ber HaGoyla. So it's not a machlokes, so everything fits in beautifully. So we're back to our original assumption, you could use Maisa for any mitzvah. However, the Chassam Sof, after he explains the Ber HaGoyla, he writes a pretty sharp lashon. Mechilas kavoidei shaga b'raya. He didn't see the Mariel innovating inside. Because Mariel, as Maram Rutenberg, stress that you can't use maaser for mitzvahs because maaser is mammon aniyim. He doesn't say because it's a davar shebechayva. It's mammon aniyim. So then even if it's not chayva, it's not your money to use. And here the Chassam Sofer says probably the biggest yisoid for today. And the Chassam Sofer says that really maaser ksafim does not have any direction. It's only a darbanon, it's a minig. The question is how you decide to use it. If your attitude is, I always give maaser ksafim for aniyim, then you can use for other mitzvahs. It's as if you earmarked this for aniyim. And the evidence I would like to add, it's very meduik in the Lashon Maram Rutenberg. Achar shech zikah lisitim laniyim, shekach nohagu kol b'nei hagoyel to give for aniyim. If the minig in your city or in your life is to give it for aniyim, then you can't give it for mitzvahs. But let's say you have no such minig, you use maaser ksafim for any mitzvah. Then we apply the Maram Metz. Any mitzvah is not a davar shebechayva. So the Chassam Sofer is saying basically that if your minig is to give it to any mitzvah, it's perfectly okay. And that's why it's not a machlokes. Mariel is talking about that your minig was to use it for aniyim. Then don't give it for another mitzvah. And you see this in also one of the Kadmoin, the Leket Yoisha, that's the Hanhagos of Trumas Hadeshen, it's Yeridea, page 76. He says, when you start giving maaser, make it either unspoken or spoken tonight, I am using maaser for any mitzvah. Then you could use it for any mitzvah, but not talis, tefillin, or esrig. Why not those? Davar shebechayva, that no one argues on. So basically, we see that really that tzedakah is one great mitzvah, but maaser is lav dafka aniyim. And I must mention, which is pashut, I mean, my experience definitely shows, people ask shilos about the strangest mitzvahs, as we'll soon see. But no doubt about it, the minig today in America, Tavshin Bey Gimel, is to use maaser for any mitzvah. I saw the Shevet Sofer, the Chassam Sofer's Einikol, Yeridea Siman Pei Dalid, writes in his times already things change, that maaser is definitely for any mitzvah. I think today it's certainly so. So basically we're going to say that maaser ksafim is a form of maaser sheni, for mitzvahs. Unless someone always gave for aniyim, then we have the klal, it became maaser ani. Now, the truth is, even if someone always gave for tzedakah, and now he wants to change, it's not the end of the world. I saw the Mechaz Yitzchak Chelik Ches, the end of Pei Beis, he quotes in a Tas Soyrek that I don't have, but he says that even if you always gave it for tzedakah, you could be matan neder, like any other neder, and change your direction of maaser. What to me was a chiddush is, let's say for the past 30 years, I've been giving for aniyim. But let's say I decide this month I'm going to earn money and give it for a mitzvah. Do I have to really be matan neder? How is aniyim zoicha and kind of what I didn't yet earn? Isn't that a davar shloi b'lo'olam? Maybe all the problem is when I earn the money, so then kvar zochu aniyim. But how the aniyim zoicha to what I didn't even earn? Why can I change for the next month without hataras l'darim? I taka found that Rugas Aboisam Yeridea Siman Reish Chav. He taka says this: when do you have a problem? If you already earned the money, then we could say there was zoicha, there were kaina. But before I earned the money, there shouldn't be a problem. So basically, we're going to say the following: that really maaser ksafim is certainly much more similar to maaser sheni. Unless a person has a minig to give a dafka aniyim, he can use it for any mitzvah that is not a davar shebechayva. And as we said earlier, Marmet says he wouldn't do the mitzvah had he not been able to give it for maaser. Because again, the point is that maaser ksafim is to increase mitzvahs, not to pay for them. But after all is said and done, the Avos Chesed, the Chavetz Chaim in Perik Yutes, he says, but really, the first usage, the priority usage for maaser is faniyim. We can't forget achicha evyain. In fact, the Chassam Sofer in that tshuva, who's making with other mitzvahs, miyois toiv, he says, give 50% for aniyim and 50% for mitzvahs. So the point is that really, it's really any mitzvah, but again, keep a focus on aniyim. the Netziv in the Emek Sha'ala in Kuf Lamed Beis, he says that really, don't forget, the Tanchuma says Amolei Torah is the priority. He says, I'll give you an eitzah. Find a Amol Torah that's an ani, and that is the premium tzedakah, the premium maaser. Amolei Torah that aniyim. I saw the Stipler in Beis Kuf Chavav in his Kraina de Igrasa. He writes he had agmas nefesh noira. So that caught my attention. What was the Stipler's terrible aggravation? He said it seems someone had an organization that was very worthy, and the Stipler endorsed it, and he said you could use maaser. Told this person you could use maaser. So this person right away publicized you could use maaser for this organization. Stipler says, oh, I thought you were asking for your personal life. You publicize it, so you know what's going to happen? Everybody's going to give for this organization. Aniyim atei aleihem. An important attitude. You know, we have to keep a focus of aniyim. There are, Baruch Hashem, wonderful moises out there, but don't forget, achicha evyain. So basically, you have to be focusing on aniyim. It's a good idea to keep a 50-50, proportion. But one thing is clear: davar shebechayva cannot be used. You can't use mice for that. And also, if you would do the mitzvah anyhow. Gesundheit, do the mitzvah and don't use mice. Now let's apply this more specifically. So one thing is clear: davar shebechayva, talis, tefillin, dalat minim, matzah. You can't use mice. Now you'll be allowed to say, okay, I'm going to buy my dalat minim from an ani. No, but that is still not a heta, because at the end of the day, you're buying something. It's like going to a bazaar that the shul has, and they're saying proceeds for the shul, but you're buying something. So that's not just a benefit. That's buying something, and that of course you don't use mice. Now we'll soon see, and this is important. You're allowed to give the mice to anybody you want, to any tzedakah you want. That's called toivas hana, and toivas hana you're allowed to have hana from. And the biggest raya is from the source. Because maaser sheni, you're allowed to have toivas hana. In fact, you eat it. Your family eats it. That's fine. Toivas hana is fine. But something that you buy, and as I saw that Tzedakah Mishpat, Rabbi Yakov Zev points out, that's a purchase that has a shavius. You can't use mice for that. You can't use mice to buy tefillin from a sefer that's an ani, or buy matzah from a person that's an ani, because you're getting a real benefit. Toivas hana means a side benefit, a kavod or a good feeling. So something that is a chiyuv, you can't use ma'aseh even if you buy it from an ani. The Maril that we mentioned earlier is quoted in the Magen Avraham, Mishnah and Tafresh Tzadik Dalid. He was asked about giving matanos levyonim for ma'aseh ksafim. So Maril says, well, even though it's only a mitzvah d'rabbanan of giving matanos levyonim, but it's still a davar shebechayva. So basically, we don't use maaser for matanos levyonim. The poskim do say, if once you fulfill your minimal obligation of giving matanos levyonim to two aniyim, whatever you give beyond that you could use maaser ksafim, because that's not a davar shebechayva. A little more of a chiddush, but this is pashit. The Shlah Kaddish in the beginning of Masechta Yuma, he says that when you spend money on kaparos, don't use mice for that. Now, the truth is, if a big family has a few children, it could be over $100 that you spend for kaparas. Now, this is a little bit more of a chiddush, because kapara is not even a mitzvah rabbanon, it's a minig. But the Mishnah Berurah in Reish, Taf Reish Hey, Sif Kat and Vav quotes this. What's the svara? There it's pashut. The point that we said of davar shebechayva is, what you'll do anyhow, don't use mice. Mice is to make mitzvahs, not to pay for them. So even if it's only a minig level, but it's still a davar shebechayva mitzad the minig. So that's it, very revealing. It's lav dafka deraisa, but even a minig that's a davar shebechayva, don't use ma'isa. A tricky question, which is the minig Yisroel quoted at the beginning of Hilchos Pesach, Tav Chav Tes Aleph, to give mois chitim faniyim before Pesach. Can you use ma'isa ksafim to pledge mois chitim? So the emes is, if you look at the Ramah, in those days, it was actually a communal tax. If you were part of the city, the Ramah describes what makes you part of the city, you're mechuyev to give mois chitim. Then you couldn't use ma'aseh ksafim for mois chitim. But the poskim say that today it's basically a tzedakah. No one enforces it, no one requires it. We make an appeal to get money. then that's not a davar shebechayva, and you could use maaser for mois chitim. Someone asked me a shaila, and it was amusing, but he wasn't joking. He owes a lot of money, so he wants to use his maaser to pay up his chayvis, because priyas bal chayv mitzvah. So I told him, good joke, but I didn't tell him that actually, but I told him in a nice way, that's davar shebechayva. But it's interesting, I did find the Knei Boisim Chelik Gimel Siman Pei Beis. Actually, I found it earlier, the Vakasta, the Anya, and Chelik Aleph Pei Ches, both have this shaila, and they say, Priyas B'chayv Mitzvah means you have to do it, but not that you could use maaser for it. They do bring from the Bnei Yisroel and Derech Pikudecha, that seems to say you could use maaser for paying chayvis, but the Bnei Yisroel means to say, if you wouldn't, you're not mechuyev to pay it, it's something that he was moichel already, or it's something that you wouldn't pay because you don't have the finances for it, and you'll never do it. Something like that, no, maybe you could use maaser. But a regular priyas bal chayv mitzvah means pay the money, but not from maaser. We had this in yeshiva more than once. A bacher has a bad habit, and maybe smoking, whatever it is, and he makes a kabbalah. Whenever he does what he's not supposed to do, he's going to give $100 for tzedakah. And now he wants to use maaser. So I told him, that's not a good idea, because then the whole thing won't work. It's like, the Rebbe charges $2 if you come late. So the rich kid comes to yeshiva, gives Rebbe $100 and says, here, this for the next 50 times. So you're really making a joke out of the whole system. So here especially, it's a davar shebechayva, and use non-maaser. Hopefully it's going to work. A shul membership that they have before Rosh Hashanah, you have to buy seats. So the emphasis is that if that's your shul, you should understand that's davar shebechayva. You have a membership in this place and that place, and a shul is the most important membership. A person has to have the understanding, the yashra, is that this is davar shebechayva. So therefore that can't be used, you can't use maaser for that. What I would say is, some people have their minyan, their shul, they daven Yom Narayim and Yom Tov and Shabbos, but during the week they fall into this shtibel and that shul, and their shul needs support. That we understand you could use maaser, because you're not really sitting in the seat, you're just buying it as a way of giving a donation. It's something that's also part of yashras to give tzedakah. Okay, you want to use maaser, give maaser. Belsky Zechariah Baruch once told me, he does not walk into a shul even for a mincha, and he won't walk until he gives a little bit of money for the shul. They have a beautiful shul, the heating, the air conditioning. That's a certain attitude, a yashra's attitude. You're nana, so you support. So basically, what you have to give, where you daven, your seat that you need, is not maaser. The other shul that you want to take a part in and donate to them, that you could use maaser. A person gets an aliyah, makes them a sheberach and bavur sheyitain. So that's really not an obligation. Some people in the gabis bavur sheyitain, they suddenly get a violent coughing attack, and they wait till the gabbai gives up, and then he goes weiter, okay, bavur sheyitain. They're not going to get a bill in the mail, right? The teretz is, it's not really a chiyuv. So it's a way of giving tzedakah that you could use maaser. I've said this more than once, a good idea for a person that wants to give tzedakah b'simcha, and not chalili b'oiva, on the yer levavcha. I think I saw the Pnei Menachem said this, that a person should take money, maaser money, let's say $100 or $1,000, whatever it is, put it into small bills, and put it into an envelope in his pocket. And now, when a mashulach approaches you, you realize that this is not my money. If I would give you $1,000, give it out in the next week, you would feel great. I'm making people happy. It's not even my money. It doesn't cost me a penny. That's the attitude to maaser ksafim. Take money and realize it's not yours. It's Bari Olam's money. It's maaser shein. It's not yours. So that's a great idea, to give to the meshulachim and not feel a pinch, because it's not my money. So I've said this many times. Someone asked me a good question. How could you use maaser ksafim for the mashulach and shul? That's davar shebechayva. You have an asay, you have a lois asay to give tzedakah. I told him it's a good kasha, but the emphasis, that's really what maaser ksafim is, to give it for an ani. We extend that to other mitzvahs also, but no doubt about it that's really part of the intention of maaser ksafim. So this is one davar shebechayva that you're allowed to use maaser ksafim, because that's really what it's intended for, especially those cheetahs that hold it's only for ani. Avad, it's not a stira to say you're allowed to use it, and it's davar shebechayva, but that's a legitimate davar shebechayva. These are just a few examples of what's davar shebechayva or not. Baruch Hashem, today we can say Baruch Hashem, to our eternal credit, there are hundreds of worthy organizations, Kain Yirbu, EF Shlefartim, Kirabim Heim, when you see an organization that's taka doing good work, that is a candidate for maaser ksafim. But the klal is not a davar shebechayva and not a mitzvah you would do anyhow. Now, one of the big questions today is tuition. Can you use maaser to pay for tuition? And again, for a big family that has a few children in yeshiva, you're talking about close to $100,000 annually. So the emphasis is that tuition is really a davar shebechayva. The pasuk says, "Limadatem oisem es b'neichem." Let's not forget, we have a chiyuv to educate our children. Now, we are busy, and Baruch Hashem, yeshivas do our jobs, but they're doing our jobs, our chayv. And that's why the Be'er Sheva in the Tshuva Sim Mem Aleph says you can't use maaser ksafim to pay for a malamed. Now, in those days, it wasn't a yeshiva malamed, but zil basa taima. Teaching your child Torah is your chiyuv. And that's why the Rav in Talmud Torah Aleph Zayin and the Avas Chesed, the Chavetz Chaim Yotes Beis, both say to pay the malamed with tuition with maaser ksafim is wrong. Davar shebechayva. Now they don't talk about a yeshiva, but who adin? Rav Moshe Taka does talk about a yeshiva. Yerdei Chelik Beis Siman Kuf Yud Gimel. I should mention Rav Shlomo Klugen Tov Tam Vadas Tlisa Beis Sadik Vav says even if your child's malamed is an ani, so you say I'm giving tzedakah, but it's not only tzedakah; it's davar shebechayva. So basically, yeshiva tuition is a simple Torah dika davar shebechayva. Now, the only question is, to what age am I mechuyev? Because the Mechaber says in Shulchan Aruch Yerdei Reish Mem Hey Vav that the minig is that to teach a child Torah shebiksav is your obligation, but maybe Torah shebal peh is different. So the emphasis, I don't know when the boys when they get to Mesifta, I don't know if they know Torah shebiksav. I'm afraid they don't. But more than that, the Shulchan Aruch does say that if you could afford it, then taka pay for your child Torah shebal peh. And that's why it's questionable if we could pay tuition at a Mesifta level. The Leked Yosha and the Pri Yitzchak spells it out in Beis Chav Zayin, seems to say that taka, since it's beyond Torah shebiksav, now Torah shebal peh, maybe you could use maaser money. But Rabbi Yankov Kamenetsky, and I saw it also in Emes LeYaakov and Our Simon, also the Shevet Alevi Ches Kuf Lamed Gimel, both say that Lamaisa the Shulchan Aruch recommends even Torah shebal peh, teach your child. So it's not advisable to use maaser ksafim for Mesifta level. Now some have said when he gets to Beis Medrash already, so already I taught him Torah shebal peh. No, that I could understand. But even in Beis Medrash, it's not full tuition, it's maaserable. Don't forget, part of it is for a dormitory, room and board. So basically, whatever is needed, and you feel your child, of course, has to go to Beis Medrash. So it's a better idea, and the Gemara says in Be'at Hazayin, Kol Mezon Oisah Shel Adam Ksuvan Loim Rashana Yom Kippurim, Chutz, from a few things, and one of them prominently so is Haitzaz Ban of a Talmud Torah. Don't forget, there's a rebate. You get back the money. You know, people are very generous buying the Kavod Shabbos, delicacies, and Einik Shabbos, but the same Gemara says tuition. So the Rav Shulchan Aruch points this out in Aleph Zayin, and it says, don't worry about paying tuition. You get it back. Now, some people feel that tuition today is so high, even the Baruch can't afford it. So they start bargaining, and they're going to go all nervous, but the Baruch could afford it, don't worry. So I think I could say that at a Beis Medrash level, mi'ikidin, you could use maaser for it. But if you want to have the skula, that the Rav seems to say, that if you don't use maaser, zoras v'niska, you'll have good children. I know a Yid, Pasha the Yid, he had children, mamish, the Gedolim Yisroel of the previous door. And he used to say clearly, his chus was because he was very faithful to tuition, even though he couldn't afford it, he gave full tuition. So it's definitely a big skula to give tuition of your own money, but there's definitely a tzati mekel and Beis Medrash level, especially in Eretz Yisroel. Whatever is not for the gashmis of the learning is certainly you could use for maaser. Now, we hear the shaila, my yeshiva charges an exorbitant amount, more than the average yeshiva. Can I use maaser for the difference? After all, the chi of davar shebechayva is to give him a chinuch, not the best chinuch necessarily. No, you might say, well, you want the best chinuch, so pay for it. So then you can be makel that difference what the yeshiva charges for their superior chinuch. Now, also, today yeshivas are doing this, and it's a good idea. Because the system is that we send our child to the yeshiva, We bargain with tuition. The yeshiva can't meet the budget. So who becomes the fundraiser? The Rosh Yeshiva. I mean, the system can't work. You can't be a fundraiser Rosh Yeshiva. So yeshiva started saying, we're charging full tuition even if you're in kollel, even if you're learning. You get the money any way you want. You want to collect the money, you want to use maaser, I don't care. Just give us tuition so we could run the yeshiva and not be in a deficit. So if they give you that allowance, so then in Chanami, you could use part of it, the money that you can't do without it, that you could use maaser ksafim. A wonderful idea of using maaser ksafim for tuition is a zayda pays for the enikos tuition. That's not a davar b'chayv for the zayda. It's a wonderful way of helping his children who are learning. So it's an ashrei maskil adult helping the children and be able to use maaser for that tuition that's not really the zayda's chiyuv. I should mention lav dafkan enikos tuition. If you have a brother, a sister that's in kollel and they can't manage, and you're working, you have panasa, use maaser for them. It's my family. Adarabba. The Rambam says the first tzedakah is karev koydem. I have a great hana helping my brother or sister. Wonderful taivas hana is mutter. A yeshiva building fund is probably similar to a bais medrash building fund. Both of them, if it's a required tax that you can't come to the yeshiva without it, so then fafalin, it's a tax you have to pay. If it's just a way of getting donation, then that donation you could use maaser, because that's not davar shebechayva. Girls' tuition, there would be a tzad to say that you could always pay maaser because the pasuk hasn't changed. L'madatem oisem es b'neichem v'loi b'noisechem. And Taka, the Minchas Yitzchak Chelik Yudsim and Pei Hey, seems to feel that girls' tuition is not a davar shebechayva. Rav Moshe in that same tshuva, Rabbi Yakov in that same Emes Yaakov have a different approach. That in America there are truancy laws. You can't keep a child home and not send them to school. They have to go to an education. If it's not public school, so send them to a parochial school, your school. But you have to send every boy or girl to school. So Dr. Moshe, sending to a public school, chas v'shalom, is shmad. So today, the girls' schooling, chinuch, tuition, is a davar shebechayva. Not out the learning shaboy, because there's no chiyuv, but out the fact that you're a shemayim, but they have to have in school. So that's why the minig is, although I mentioned there are some Mekilim, I know Stambach is also Mekel in his tshuvas, but the minig is that the girls' schooling should not be used for maaser. Again, if they charge extra, you could make a chiluk, what's the davar shebechayva to get them to a school, but the bulk of the tuition should not be used for maaser. Seminary, however, is also, there's no truancy laws, so at that age, and a chanami, that's taka an extra ruchnias, that's part of man tilma the year. It's your daughter, adarabba, chayecha koydben. But not the full seminary course. I mean, there's the traveling is not davar shebechayv. There are plenty of wonderful seminaries in Brooklyn, so you don't have to go to Eretz Yisroel dafka, and the room and board and the trips. I'm talking about the what you estimate the ruchnias part of it. That can be used for maaser ksafim. Because don't forget that we have to make sure the aniyim are provided and maaser are provided. If you want to be mekel, whether it's tuition for boys or girls, whatever it is, make sure you don't abuse it. You use the right amount. A big part of it is costs that are not Torah related. Now, another thing I would like to say, it's not only a mitzvah faris, but an eitzah toiva. At times you can have a child, boy or girl, that's not doing well in school and even failing. Very often, a tutor, extra help, is pikuach nefesh mamish. A boy or girl that sits in a class a day in, day out and fails is heading for disaster. And a stitch in times, like they say, saves 9. A tutor, help, sometimes a mentor could guide the child through the difficulty, pick them back on their level, and can mamish be hatzolos nefashis. So this, to use maaser, and tutors are expensive. To use maaser, you might say, well, davar shebechayva, otherwise the child will fail. Good. So you'll use non-maaser, gesundheit. But one thing I ask from you, give the child a tutor. Get what he needs. It's mamish b'kuach nefesh. If you won't do it otherwise, alay val tzavara, use maaser. Kol mitzvah shtavel yad, if you won't do it, you might say, but forget about that. Make sure the child has a tutor. If you won't use non-maaser, use maaser on my Cheshvan. But give the child what he needs. It's mamish, a matter of pikuach nefesh. Minchas Yitzchak in Chelik Ches Siman Hey, in fact, allows using maaser to get your child a good friend, a chavatov. I don't know what he means. Maybe buy the child, give him a prize, whatever it is. But even for a chavatov, a kosh game for a tutor, that's mamish what he needs. Sometimes we have a shaila, you want to give the child an incentive to learn. He's a bright boy, he doesn't need a tutor, he just needs the zitzfleish, he needs the incentive. So you promise, if you learn good, I'll give you a prize. And if you, let's say you can't afford that prize, but you're doing it anyhow because was tut mir nicht bei the kinder, that will be maaser. It's a wonderful maaser investment. You know, even in fact, the balabas once asked me, he was making money, but wasn't a big gear, and he needed an incentive to learn, and he wasn't learning. So he wanted to give himself a prize. I said, great idea. I told him, if you can't afford the prize for yourself, use maaser. But at the end of the day, that's what maaser is until Madayera, to increase and improve our ruchnius. Now, if some of those that are zoich to have children learning in kollel, boy or girl, daughter or son, so at that stage, when he's already married, there's no truancy laws and there's no chiyuv of l'madatam es b'neichem. And that's why it's pashit that you could use maaser for supporting them in learning. The stipler in Chelik Beis, in crying a tough nun, someone asked about it, he goes, Adarabba, dafka give your child your maaser because karav kaida, mitzvah yaisa. Are you benefiting? There it is, that's taivas hana. But I must mention, I saw the Chasam Soif in that tshuva and the stipler in Kraina, both make an important point. If when you mechayiv yourself with your mechatanim before the engagement to support your children, you did it as a financial obligation and you didn't have a mind to use maaser, so it's a davar shebechayva. It's a financial davar shebechayva. Maybe it's not going to support kollel, but if you to makabel to give them as part of the shidduch, then you're limited. What you have to do is say, I'm makabel to support my children and I'll take care of it. And in the back of your mind, you know using maaser, which is legitimate. Now, lamaisa, again, don't forget achicha evyoin, and as the Chasam Sofer says, use maaser for your children, but not more than 50%, he suggests. 50% should go for aniyim. Now, if the child's an ani, so then that's included. That's a good idea. But basically, the Rav Shulchan Aruch in Talmud Torah Aleph Zayin, the Chasam Sofer say you could use maaser for children's learning. But, and I must mention this, the Rav afterward, he says you're allowed to use maaser. He says, but if you're a Zoras Veniska, and you know the Bershon Vierte Welt, it's better not to use maaser. I know many people who are struggling their own, but they use their own money and not maaser for their children's learning. They want the learning should be b'kedusha, b'tahara, with a school of the Rav of Zoras Veniska. And I've seen it work, so I'm telling you it's a good idea to try not to use maaser, but if it's a question of that or nothing, avada maaser is perfectly mutla al pi halach. Also, of course, and this is important to mention, to supporting children for learning, what are given to children that are moisterous, luxuries, not only are not helping learning, but are distracting from learning, if not worse, that's not conducive for learning, so it has to be a reasonable amount that will help them learn, not help them be distracted with other needs. Amal, we have parents that are living longer, and they have medical expenses, and now it's a reverse role. The child has to support the parents. So the truth is that a child can use maaser money to help his parents. Teretz is pashut. Davar shebechayva is only Mishel haben, Mishel av. The ben is not mechuyev, and that's why Yerdei Reish Mem Hilchos Kibbutz Sif Hey, that if the parents don't have, the child has to help the parents, and the poskim add. But that you could use maaser. That's your idea. Reish Nun Aleph Gimel, because the expense shaboy is not a davar shebechayva. But the Ramah does caution im yodei maseges, if you could afford to help parents with your own money and you decide to use tzedakah. So chas v'sham, you're making your parent a tzedakah case. So the Ramah, I'm not going to teach this tavei meira lemisha mefarnes aviv mimois tzedakah shaloi. It's a terrible bazayan. You can't give your parents a few dollars, even a lot of dollars. You have it, you have the money. So again, it's the same attitude. What you could, if you will do the mitzvah without using maaser, that's better, that's a pure kibbut of. But if the question is, if I'm not going to use maaser, I won't do it, or won't do it generously, so we look at ikar halacha, you're allowed to use it to support the parents. The last group of questions are basically when we have benefit from the tzedakah. So, for example, you want to buy a yeshiva, you want to buy a raffle, a Chinese auction, you want to pay for your yeshiva's dinner, the 360 they charge, you want to use maaser, etc., etc. So at first glance, you're gaining. How do you gain from tzedakah? But that we're not intimidated. That's the old klal of Toivas Hana. In fact, in Yeridei Reish Dun Zayin, Sif Yud, the Mechaber says that the Gabi tzedakah cannot give the tzedakah that he's entrusted with to his relatives. He can't be partial to give to his relatives because it's not ethical. But the Ramos quick to add, that's only a Gabai. But every person with his own money could give to his relatives, whoever he wants. Veheim Kaidman. The Ramos saying two Chedushim, that you could give the money whoever you want. And not only you could, you should give to your relatives. Chayecha karv Kaidem. So this is clearly the source that in Maisa and Maisa Ksafim, Toivas Hana is perfectly legitimate. There's nothing wrong. Now, however, we're talking about a different benefit. He wants to use tzedakah for his benefit. The Mashal, Bach asked me in the yeshiva, he wants to pledge money for tzedakah. Hopefully he'll pass the regent. Test, an English test. So I told him, that's like, there's Makarov down in the Gemara. To give tzedakah, I rate tzedakah gemura. It's had the gama, whatever the gear says. But don't make it conditional. If you fail, you have to give anyhow. But that's a Toivas Hana. That's mamash our Gemara. Now, someone asked me a shayla, mamash warmed my heart. This is a yid that's giving a lot of tzedakah, and he said, I don't touch a penny. I don't use a penny of it until I'm mafish for tzedakah. What he does, he puts his tzedakah money, the maaser money, into a credit card with a big amount, and it's only used for tzedakah purposes, for maaser purposes. Beautiful. What was his shayla? He says, because when I put it into this credit card, I get a lot of points. I can sometimes fly to Eretz Yisroel. I must be giving a lot of tzedakah. But he can fly to Eretz Yisroel with the points that he gets for putting money into this credit card. So I told him, it's a wonderful schus you have to give tzedakah, but this is Toivas Hana. Tzedakah is not paying for that. It's like from a third party. It's from the credit card. And I told him, everybody follows on this attitude because we give tzedakah and we get tax deduction. Don't anybody wonder maybe we should give back the money because we're getting money from the government? So tax deduction is a legitimate form of Toivas Hana. So why is credit card giving you points any different? In other words, it's not even causing tzedakah anything. So this is pashut, a Toivas Hana that belongs to the giver. But where it gets trickier, when it starts to be a little more of yours. Lamashal, the Paiskim discuss that you're allowed to buy svarim with tzedakah money, with maaser money. So the Be'er Sheva has an interesting chiddush, same tshuva, Simon Mem Aleph, that since you're makayim the mitzvah of kisvas hashir azoi, he's writing his Torah with svarim, maybe buying svarim is a davar shebechoiva. Okay. Now, Lamaisa, I told you earlier, the Marametz's shaila was about buying svarim, and he was mekel. Could be held once you have some svarim, you don't have to buy more svarim. But Lamaisa, the Paiskim seem to say that buying svarim with Maisa would be mutter, but there are two very important preconditions. If you buy it and keep it for yourself, so then that's like going to a bazaar and buying what the shul is selling. So it has to be that others could use it. And then you're zaycha to the mitzvah tzedakah, ois tzedakah b'chol eis, buy svarim and let others use it. So the only way you could use money to buy svarim is if you write mutter lakol and it's accessible to others. Now the minig used to be you buy svarim with maaser, keep it in your house, and write niknem mois maaser. But the problem is no one comes to your house to borrow the sefer. They have enough svarim. So that's not advisable to keep in your house. What you could do is buy it, if you're in yeshiva or in a shul, you buy the Gemara that they're learning, you write, mois maaser, please use, and keep it in shul. That's legitimate maaser. But there's still a problem. Because after 120, it doesn't belong to the person. The Yerushalayim can't keep it. It's niknem mois maaser. So you have to write niknem mois maaser, ve'enoi shali, it belongs to maaser. So many poskim say, although that works, if you have this two preconditions, mois maaser, ve'enoi shali, but it's not advisable because you have something that's not yours. The real maaser without shayla is where you buy money, buy svarim for the shul or the yeshiva and donate it for kinyan svarim. That's a long-lasting, lifetime and beyond investment that yields very rich dividends. I saw a sefer in Tarvadas that must have been donated in the 1940s. You see the dates, it was nifta, high shata, pulaployim. This tzedakah that lasts from giving svarim is eternal. So that's a form of toivas hanot, you're using it also, but it's fine, it's not a stira to maaser. What the yeshiva asks you to come to the dinner, and if the covering is 360, so supper is not less than 360, so you can make a cheshvan. What I pay for regular supper, that's not maaser, that's mamish, hanor mamish, and the rest you could use maaser. Buying an aliyah with maaser, so that's an old shayla, because the shlah discusses already. Because lichari, the money's going to the shul, so I'm giving money to shul. I am getting the covet of getting an aliyah, toivas hanor. And the truth is, an aliyah is an estimable value, but it's not a gufay mammon. So the shlah says you could use maaser to buy aliyah, but he adds one important clause. The fellow before you pledged 500, and you say 600, and you won. You can't use maaser of 600, because maaser had 500 without you. You only use maaser when you outbidded the previous bidder. Also, some say if the other bidder was more generous than you are, and he would not use maaser had he bought the aliyah, so then you're not benefiting, then really you're being mafsid. So it's really not so posh that you're allowed to use maaser, even though the Taz is mekel, and I was simration and Reish Mem Tes Aleph, and he doesn't make a clause only what you outbidded the other person, because the truth is the other person talked big, but cheap. The talk is cheap. Words are cheap. You gave the money. So the Taz was mekel, and even the shlah writes, Einay roi, to use the full amount. So I will say that better to only use a maaser what you outbidded the other person. Hamekel on the full amount is being saimach on the Taz, and maybe even the shlah did not hold its asam yekidin. We had a shayla in the yeshiva that I thought was, could I mention, that the people leave svarim in the yeshiva, new gemaras and new kaivsim, it's amazing, $100 value, 3 svarim, and they don't even come claim it. So the yeshiva sells it for a third of the price, and all proceeds go for kinyan svarim. So Bach asked me, can I use maaser for these svarim? I said, what kind of maaser is that? You're saving 2/3 of the cost, you're getting gufay mammon, that's not maaserable. That's not toivas hanor, that's the real thing. And that's zicha, not maaser. And another point I wanted to mention, the world today we're living in, today you can't even give a tzedakah without getting something. It's a world oriented on getting. I think we have to, reflect about this. I wonder why everything has to be getting. Today, everything is you give, you get. I think we should go back to the old fashion of giving without getting. But anyhow, if someone has a way of giving a poor person, disguising a tzedakah, the mashal, before the fellow makes a chassan, he gives a generous wedding gift, or he hires a worker and pays him a lot of extra more than the regular cost. Anyway, you could get a tzedakah to an ani in a bakavadik way is real maaser. That's an ashrei maskil eldol. And last but not least, I'm just going to give you ha'ara to think about, because it's really something that's important to think about, because it's not as simple as we'd like it to be. And that is using maaser money for a raffle, a Chinese auction that we have today, very popular. So the emes is that pashtis, I'm giving tzedakah full amount, and I'm getting a thrill. That's toivas hanor. Doesn't cost them anything. So l'chayra muskavish, you could use maaser for a raffle. Rav Moshe in Archaim Dalet Ayin Vav makes one clause, that really, if they have a special raffle where they only have a limited amount of tickets, in other words, they're charging a lot for each ticket, they're giving a very big prize, but they figured out that we're going to make money because we're getting a lot per ticket. If there's limited tickets, then each ticket has a gufay mammon, has a shavius. If there's unlimited tickets, so then it's pure maaser with your types of no. But if it's limited tickets, be careful, don't use for maaser. I mean, you can use part of it, but not the full value. But we're talking about a unlimited tickets, that's a regular maaser with a toivas hanor. But my question to you is, let's say you won the prize. Now let's retrack a moment. You were very great and very generous in using maaser to buy the ticket, because if I lose, I'm going to win because I'm giving tzedakah anyhow, tzedakah money. So now that you used the ticket of maaser and you won, who won the ticket l'chayra? Maaser. And to quote Rabbi Yisrael Gefish in his tshuva chelik chesim and samach dalet, how could you keep the ticket? You use their money. So how could you take the money? And I can tell you a nice list of poskim that hold that if you win, you don't keep the prize, you give it to maaser. Now, the truth is, you don't have to give to the one that sold you the ticket. It's not theirs. You can give it to any maaser, but not to you. It's not theirs. They sold, but you bought it with maaser money, however you like to give it. But Rav Moshe in that same tshuva has a problem with this analysis. And he says, if you're going to tell me that you're selling raffles, if you lose, you lose, and if you win, you can't keep it, it's not going to work. So maybe there's like a lay bezin masna that's a taka that belongs to maaser. But maaser wants it to work, the Chinese auction. That's what he wants to say. Rav Sternbuch and Gimel Reish Beit Hesed says the same thing. Rav Vosler and Tes Simon Reish, he says you're allowed to use maaser. He doesn't even get involved with the problem if you win. Apparently there has to be some type of understanding that tzedakah is nichel leibekach. But what's interesting is someone asked me, why don't we just use maaser money for the raffle and make it tonight? If I lose, so maaser loss. If I win, it's that I'm using my own money. So I saw the Chut Shani in Chelik Beis and Shimon Amar said that's not yosha. It's not wrong, but not yosha. But someone asked me, it was a bigger lamdin, he wanted to give a head check to pay for the raffle ticket. And if he wins, then he'll tear it up. It wasn't given. And he'll give his own money. Also not Yosha. But one thing I want to tell you, and please look into this point, the Rabbi Yisrael Yankel Fisher, and that tshuva has quotes of Moshe. He says it doesn't make sense. How could you give away what's not yours? How could Tzedakah give away the prize and not theirs? So he wants to say something very interesting. He says that taka, you sell the ticket, and the ticket belongs to maaser. But we have to reprogram the lotteries. That they don't take your ticket that you bought. They'll take your name. Now, you paid money for the raffle ticket, and the raffle ticket belongs to the maaser, unknown maaser. But they give you a taivas hana that they're going to put your name into the drawing. The name doesn't belong to maaser. Then you could win and keep it. Now, I don't understand if that's better than a Moshe's Eitzah, because you're making a spiel, a name. But either Eitzah is good, so please buy the tickets, and if you win, keep it, because I'm going to talk to you all. Was? I left it out because
Shem Egenshir, tell like the biggest character of Smith for today's year. There's a Shem after Kaddish, right away, the Smith will say the sequel of the shir. Hananya ben Akashem, Eretz Yisroel, Zakes, es soll für hier Ter mitschnem mal und Chofetz und Sitka Jagel Ter Viade.
Nein, ja, hey, Schmeier, aber mit Verach, Lamm und Beo, Mayo.
Isador, Misala, Misalosh, Main Kedisho,
Vichu.
Leilo, Mikaboso, Vishiroso, Tishboso, Ramoso, Nabiram Yamo, Roman, Israel, Varamuna, Tamidem, Akol, Tamidem, Akomodas, Numara, Sativas, Rodain, Yopala Sarvasad, Yelo, Hainel, Haishumara, Mukin, the Burak, Mukhaina, the Mishai. Epikono mikono mabi and Mishma, Yoviaro, Roman, Eshura Mishma, Mulai, Kol Yisrael, Roman, Aishula, Removi, Brahmovia, Shola, Mulai, Kol Yisrael,
Well, you gave Tovis or no? You gave yeshiva $10,000. You got back 9. But you gave them, so you gave them $1,000. But that's $1,000. You're getting Tovis or no? If your uncle don't have to pay Uncle Sam $5,000.
You're not asking about the Earl Ketchum.
No. It's so for words. I'll try it. Huh?
If we all have to maaser, it's a mitzvah. Sag ja noch, da verdienen Geld.
No. Yeah, you got that. No. If you can afford it, then a so you could sack a save a few years before. If you can afford it, why not? You simply ready? I want to keep. No, that's not fair. Different. Okay, that's different. Yeah, okay, fine.
Okay, Okay, Chavrava has extra maaser to give, or even not extra, part of the maaser. Irgend shir Torah needs your donations to help with our Butster the Rabbi 718-851-8651 or email ist@yeshivanet.com. And now we're supposed to say the seekim on maaser. How do you use the maaser money?
Maaser ksafim, as we learned today, Bez Hashem, is like maaser sheni. L'mantilma the year, it's putting ruchnius into your life. It's making your work avodas hakodesh, making your money shekel hakodesh. Every dollar that you make, you're giving 10% to the Bar Yolam. So it's really enhances our avodah. But more so, the purpose of it is to do mitzvahs with it, be encouraged to do mitzvahs. It's not even your money, that 10 or 20%. The makaras from the Gimel Avos, the 3 Avos gave maaser 3 psukim. And the ik is for ruchnius. If you want to use it for yourselves, for your own ruchnius, yachaylu brachas al roish, like the Netziv says. The only preconditions are, number 1, you can't use maaser for davar shebechoyva that you're mechoyev to do. And number 2, even if it says not mechoyev, if you would do it anyhow, then don't use maaser. It's supposed to increase mitzvahs, not pay for them. The first priority, all agree, is ani. Even though it's not a maaser ani, but the first priority in ksafim is to help aniyim. So basically try to keep a 50-50 balance. Helping an ani that's an amel b'Torah is the premium maaser ksafim. Basically, if a person has to start when he gives maaser, he should first of all say bli neder, and number 2, say I'm giving it for any mitzvah, even if because otherwise maybe he would be, if he gave it for aniyim, it becomes aniyim. But today, rather the minig is that we all give for other mitzvahs. So it's probably understood. If a person did always give aniyim dafke, wants to change, so then there's always the option of ataras nedarim. Tefillin, mezuzahs, da'almin, and matzah, and someone asked me, even hid the mitzvah, which is really a chiyuv, is included in davar shebechoyva. Matanis lev yoinim, or kaparais, even though kapara is only a minig, but once it's something that we do, the Shloah says you can't use maaser, because again, maaser is supposed to increase mitzvahs, not just pay for them. Moyes chitim today is basically a tzedakah, not a tax. Priyas Balchoiv is a mitzvah, but not maaserable. Same thing, a knas a self-imposed knas should not be used for maaser. Shul membership, depending if it's really a chiyuv, but your primary shul of others, you should not use maaser. That's really what your regular cost is to help the shul. Mishaberach money, you could use maaser. It's a good idea to take maaser money, keep it in your pocket, and give it generously, because really it's not our money. That is tzedakah's money. And then there's no problem of l'yir levavcha. It's also important to mention that tuition for boys until the bais medrash level, you shouldn't use tuition. You shouldn't use maaser as tuition. If the yeshiva charges you more, and they said you could give the extra any way you like it, no, that maybe. But basically, this should be our schus of haitzos banav Talmud Torah. Beyond mesifta bais medrash, certainly in kollel, that's not a davar shebechoyva. But even when you do use maaser ksafim for tuition, it's only for the learning part, not for the accommodations, the room and board. A question of a girls' tuition, so that the poskim say that today there's a truancy laws, and girls' tuition should not use maaser for that. A einiklachs or nephews or anybody else's tuition, avada is not a davar shebechoyva, and it's a very prominent maaser ksafim. A tutor that a child needs, he must get it. If it won't come from chulin, certainly use maaser. Any help that a child needs is pikuach nefesh, whether it's a mentor, a tutor, a professional help, even emotional, if he needs a psychologist and you won't pay it otherwise, you could use maaser for that. That's really a tzos nefashos of the child. A children in kollel, you could use maaser, but it's a skula not to use maaser. Supporting one's parents, you could use maaser, but tavi me'ira, if you could afford it without maaser. The benefit of Taivas Ana is something that's not a gufay mammon, covered, getting an aliyah. But if you buy something that the shul is selling, they're selling oil for Chanukah, that's not, you can use maaser for that. A tax deduction or a benefit from the government or points in a credit card, that's from a third party, that's not a problem. That's a regular Taivas Ana. Buying svarim is not advisable if you're going to keep it. If you give it to a shul, that's a very chashuv form of maaser. Yeshiva dinner, deduct what you would pay for regular sup, and the rest is maaser. I forgot to mention an ad is also a toivas hana, but it's not a gufay mammon. And pay for the ad if you're not mechuyev to do it, then avad you could use maaser. The aliyah, the minig is to only deduct what you outbidded the previous bidder. If you want to use the full amount, yesh al mi lismach. Cheva Kinyan Svarim that sells Svarim, you should not use maaser for that. That's buying something. And you could use maaser for raffle or an auction. If you do win, you should go through the sugya and figure out why you're allowed to keep it, but probably you are allowed to keep it from one of the many reasons. Yeah.
Europe, under the